Okay, Tom La Vecchia here with New Theory Magazine podcast. Today is going to be a different variety as we're doing our first podcast here with the respected Dr. Bart Rossi. Dr. Rossi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Nice to be with you, Tom.
Always a pleasure to have you. Dr. Rossi is a clinical psychologist as well as a political psychologist. So today we're going to be focusing on the Trump presidency, his personality, and is he going to get the results to make it happen? We're not going to sit here and argue politics per se, but we're going to focus on this psychological aspect of Mr. Trump, or President Trump, rather. I want to give the full respect that's due. So, Dr. Rossi, kick it off. Give us the background as to why Trump won the election.
Well, I think Trump won the election because he appealed to a certain sector of our society. Remember, he got 46% of the vote. So the majority of folks who voted did not vote for him. But he did a very good job, give him credit, for marketing himself and pitching himself to people who are angry, frustrated with politics, disenchanted with themselves and where they're going in life and where they're feeling about the country. They're very frustrated Americans out there, and Donald Trump tapped into that. And these voters see someone who's different, abrasive perhaps, arrogant, but nonetheless someone who represents a very different, strong, authoritarian personality that they could relate to. In my view, that's why he essentially won the election.
Okay, I'll give you that, but here's the part that I struggle with, okay? So let's just say historically, Republicans would get the person who believes in, freedom in terms of guns, let's just say the Christian right, let's just say a bit more pro-business. I get that, but what does the blue-collar person in Pennsylvania have in common with a billionaire? That was the part I struggle with, and I continue to struggle with today.
Well, that is really a very smart question, Tom, because I think I can answer that by saying that a lot of these blue-collar folks feel that they've been left behind. They feel that no one is focusing on them, no one's pitching to them, and no one sees them. And Trump goes out to coal country, and he presents himself as the guy that's for coal miners. He goes out to Ohio, and he wants more jobs. He wants less regulation, more jobs, and he has hooked enough of these folks so that he could swing the election. Remember, he just barely got by. When you look at Wisconsin and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan, he barely won a number of states, but he did get enough votes because he pitched to those working class people who are disenfranchised with the country. They don't even feel that they've been looked at properly by the politicians. They've been ignored. And he paid attention to them and pitched to them as a strong man, and that got him a lot of votes.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, now he becomes president. So, first out of the gate, the Mar-a-Lago trips, are they necessary? Are they consistent with what was done in the past? Is it just, frankly, a ballsy move? Walk us through that and the psychology beyond that.
Well, what I don't like about it is that he criticized everybody else. He criticized Obama for taking too many vacations and playing too much golf. But then he spends more money probably in a few months than Obama spent in years. So he's really acting more as a hypocrite when it comes to Mar-a-Lago than anything else. He certainly has the right to have a White House outside of Washington. Everybody has some place to go in the presidency. Certainly the Bushes did and Reagan did. So that's okay in a way. But the way he presents himself as he's going to be the hardest worker, but yet then he's going to Mar-a-Lago and taking more time off than anybody when you take a look at it on a prorated basis. So it's a little bit hypocritical and bizarre, quite frankly.
Okay, so you have not treated President Trump, we're not claiming that you did, but based off the information that you see, his actions, what would your clinical, I don't want to say, maybe say diagnosis, or what would your clinical assessment be based off his personality and his actions?
Well, this is a very timely question also, because I've been writing some articles on this, and here's what I'm saying. In the context of political psychology, and you're right, I did not see him in my office, but his behavior and his comments in public on the national stage, we can make some determinations. And what I see, and I have certainly not seen any disorder like this with any other Republican, that's for sure. So I'm not singling out just the party here, but the person. I see a narcissistic personality disorder, not someone who just has some narcissistic features and maybe thinks too much of himself. I'm talking about a narcissistic personality disorder on the national stage, coupled with a thought disorder. And what I mean is that when Donald Trump says something, he creates a perception. And that perception becomes reality for him, and he wants everyone else to believe in that reality, regardless of the facts and regardless of the truth. And he gets angry if people don't believe what he believes. That's a thought disorder. It's perception that doesn't really make any sense. I mean, even when he fired Comey, he exonerated himself by saying 3 times Comey actually said that he didn't have an investigation going on him. I mean, that's ridiculous. And he says he's the champion for mental health, but the bill that he pushed through the House actually cuts mental health providers off. They're unnecessary Obamacare mandate, people like me, psychologists. So he says he's a champion for mental health, but on the other hand, he's undermining it. Oh, but by the way, he's going to solve the opiate addiction problem. But the bill also cuts off people seeking treatment. So he effectively becomes a hypocrite. And he is only looking at himself and how he projects himself and his ego. And again, if you look at how he fired Comey, what did he do? He got rid of the guy. He demeaned the guy. He marginalized him. And then he actually said he exonerated himself. I mean, that is really a convoluted and pathological thought process.
Okay, so now you're beating them up pretty good. So I want to be fair, balanced, because I'm assuming there's going to be some President Trump supporters watching this video podcast. Is it fair to say, or not fair to say, that his personality, so for example, let's call it what it is. He probably inherited a lot of money. I think it was, they say 30 million, 300 million, 3 million, whatever it was from his father. Don't get me wrong. However, he did about 10x on that. And his personality and the way he does business brought him that success. So ill or not, right? And I'm not saying he's ill or he's not ill. I'm not saying anything because I'm not qualified to. But the way he operates and his personality brought him this level of success. Is it fair to say, hey, he may be a little goofy or something's not right, but what he did brought him the success, and that same traits may lead our country in the right direction? I believe there's a fair argument to that. What do you think?
Well, I think there are some people who may have serious personality flaws that can still be successful in their own business. And remember, Donald Trump had many failures. We don't even know how successful or unsuccessful he really is. He's had some success for sure, but we don't see his tax returns, and we don't know how much debt he really does have. He says he doesn't have any real debt. I don't believe that. So his business might be built on more fabrication than reality. I mean, he had many bankruptcies. He filed at least 3 bankruptcies. He filed more than 3 times. He's had Trump vodka, Trump air. A lot of things have not gone well at all for him. And of course, we have Trump University. So being that successful, well, that's a question mark when it comes to Donald Trump. But to your point, you can have an offbeat personality and make it in business. But his personality transcends being somewhat different or odd or even a little abrasive or arrogant. It's pathological in the standpoint that he's not making any sense on the national stage. We're not talking about a Ronald Reagan who had a certain personality trait here and there that we could criticize, or a George W. Bush or Bush 41 or any other Republican. These guys did not have personality disorders of any type. This guy, Donald Trump, doesn't make sense when he speaks on a lot of these subjects. Flynn, for example, he doesn't really want to accept the fact that Flynn has a relationship with the Russians. And he wanted to actually tell Comey. That is very, very wrong. And then he said it's a fake news story. I mean, it's just trying to create a perception that's not there. It's above and beyond being a little bit off, as you say, or a little odd, or some kind of a different businessman taking over. No, it's much more than that. It's a completely different dynamic. And that's what we're dealing with as America. I think the country has gone into Trump world. And Trump world is built on a perception that's not a reality. And a lot of Republicans are getting very nervous looking at this. And that's what we're dealing with now. We're going down the road towards danger and destruction on certain of our institutions. And more is to come. Trumpism is here to stay, and more Trumpism is on the way. And I think that this is very frightful for many Americans.
Okay, now, so with that being said, okay, so you're making some claims. So let's do this. Let's focus one-on-one, meaning give us one good thing you believe Trump has done or enacted since his presidency, and give me one fatal, not fatal, but error you believe that he has made thus far in office. Give us one good, one bad.
On a positive side, I think that his Secretary of State choice was a very, very good one for these reasons. He chose someone who was not a politician, but someone who was in the private sector and knew the world stage. Tillerson, from the oil industry, actually knows people around the world, and he knows people in different countries. He has a sense of the world and the reality that exists outside the United States. I think that was a really good choice, and I like him. I think he's a very good Secretary of State. So the thinking that went into choosing him was good. Do I think that it was all because Trump was so smart about it? No, I really don't. I think he wanted someone from the oil industry to make a point, and he got someone who was really very good. But give him a real plus on that one.
Okay, so give us one of his errors, in your opinion, from either a policy standpoint or just an actionable item thus far in his presidency.
Well, what I really object to so far is his pushing of the health care bill that went through the House. As I mentioned before, if this was ever enacted, mental health would be out the window. There would be no mental health coverage, okay? And young people and old folks alike would suffer if anybody in their family had a problem, okay? And in order to have a policy that would be cheaper, you're going to get, in fact, a very cheap policy. Maybe good for millennials because they won't have to pay much. But they're not going to get much. The pre-existing conditions aren't going to really be covered. And it's a terrible, terrible bill that represents hypocrisy on his part. Again, he says he's for mental health, but he's cutting out all the mental health providers. He says he's going to solve the opiate addiction dilemma in this country. It's his top priority. But he's cutting the people who are trying to go for treatment. It is so outrageous, this bill, that it actually has the Republicans worried, just independent Democrats.
So sorry for the viewers. I have a wily cat in the background who's a little bit more rambunctious than usual. But we like to do this live to tape. I would like to keep it raw. So far, I don't think it's disrupting too much. Hopefully not. Get away from the message. But we have the cat in the background who's having some fun. All right. So with that being said, okay, so you brought up some important points, okay? So I come from a very, very democratic family here in New Jersey, okay? I tend to be in the middle. I'm not just hedging because I own the magazine. I just kind of I am where I am. But my family is very Democratic, right? And what I notice in regards to Democrats and Republicans, tell me if I'm right and fit the psychology. I believe if you're a Republican now, I personally think there's three different types of Republicans. One on the social issues that are, pro-life, and that's their core value. Some that are a little bit more financially pro-business, that's their core value. And other people that want to defend our basic rights, like first, second, gun, whatever the gun is. I think it's Second Amendment, whatever it is. And they want to defend that, okay? So here's how I believe. If you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, and you fall into one of those three buckets, if your core value is met, no matter what Trump does, they sign off. Meaning, you're pro-life, great. You fired Comey, no, great, fantastic. You're at Mar-a-Lago 7 days a week, costing us $50 million a week, no problem. Republicans seem to toe the line if their core values are met, and then an extension of that, they sign off, pardon my French, but religiously. Where Democrats, for example, if their core values are met, let's say pro-choice, if I disagree with an ancillary comment, I'll debate you till the cows come home, and we'll just fight you even though we're Democrats. What I'm saying is it seems that Republicans are more aligned because of that. Tell me what you think, and tell me the psychology. Am I right? And tell me the psychology behind the Republicans, and give me the psychology behind Democrats.
I think you're right about the Republicans. You just explained it very well. When there's certain ideology that has been met, Republicans aren't changing, even if other things are going badly, like with Donald Trump, President Trump right now. I think you hit it right, that they will still be behind him because some of their core feelings, some of their core values are being met. Therefore, they're not changing. Good point. I think you explained that very well. And that kind of explains why he keeps his base to a great extent. But when it comes to the Democrats, they want to have more open conversations. They want to have more progressive thinking, where if someone is pro-choice, if someone's pro-life, they can have their own choice. They're not as ideological in terms of that rigidity. And I don't say that rigidity in terms of altogether negative when it comes to Republicans, because they have some good points that make a lot more sense than Democrats. Like, let's have a balanced budget. What about tax breaks that make sense? What about the fact that the tax code is crazy? We all know that. Republicans have a good point, strong point there. But Democrats are more interested in open conversation. They want to have equal rights for everyone. They don't care what someone looks like. They want to know what kind of character they have. And Republicans are especially interested in their ideology and their basic thinking. And that's the point you made, and I think it's the right one.
Okay. So, New Theory is a millennial-focused online magazine. What are some of the top topics and issues regarding millennials with the Trump presidency?
Well, the first one that comes to mind, of course, is climate change. President Trump believes that climate change is a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese and perhaps the liberals. That is a complete fabrication. I mean, most every scientist in the world knows that there's climate change and it's dangerous and it's coming. Here in Florida, where I am right now, I mean, we have problems in Miami area and Southwest Florida. There are a lot of issues that need to be addressed based on all kinds of climate change problems. And Donald Trump doesn't recognize that. And people who are young today, they need to think about, well, what's going to happen to New York City here? What's going to happen if I go to move to Miami? What about all of these problems that may be developing? That's a real issue for people who are young today. And I think also when it comes to healthcare, how can you have a healthcare plan in this country that doesn't cover everyone? You can't have some people not be covered. It was the Heritage Foundation that came up with the individual mandate, and now Donald Trump is throwing it out. For example, if you have 100 people, let's say they're young, they could be older, they could be any age, But if only 5 or 6 of these people who are not insured, the 100 not insured, if 5 or 6 or 7 end up in the emergency room or the hospital in a month, that was more money than insuring the whole 100 people. So it doesn't make any sense to have these individual policies for some people and then have millions of people without health care. We, the taxpayer, the young taxpayer, okay, the millennials, they're going to end up paying for this anyway. They're going to end up paying for people out of what they earn because they're not insured and they're going to the emergency room, the hospital, the nursing home, the emergency care center. It doesn't make good sense.
Okay, so obviously healthcare. What about the economy? Millennials are they're a group that likes to share. We call it the Uberization, right? They don't like to own; they like to rent. They will rather lease an apartment rather than own a home. They rather maybe lease a car or not even own a car, and it might even be cheaper to use Lyft, Uber, or Zipcars, depending where you're at. My point being is that's going to have an effect on taxes too, because less ownership implies less taxation. So walk us through how the millennials you think are going to affect the economy, not just now, but in the future from a revenue standpoint for taxes.
Well, I think that millennials actually are going to be a good thing for the economy going forward, okay? I think that millennials have a very different viewpoint than older Americans. Older Americans think about saving from day one, putting money in the bank in 401ks as soon as possible, and building up a bundle of money for later in life. That, in my view as a psychologist, is not the proper approach for a young person. A young person should not go blow their money and create debt. We don't want debt. However, what you just said about the millennials not really buying but spending and consuming and being out there, I think that's a positive. You know why? Because they network. They get out and they meet people. They grow their brand. They look at different jobs. They move from one position to another. And they're more into the world, electronically for sure, but also socially. They can bring themselves into the world in a different way than old-timers in this country. So I think the millennials have a lot to offer in terms of where this country's going and looking at ownership and looking at renting differently and being a little bit different in how they approach life and living life, not just saving for old age. And I like that about the millennials.
Nice. So, all right. So with that being said, Dr. Rossi, you supplied a lot of insights today. How can we find you? We'll put a link to your website, but how can we find you?
It's pretty easy. brossi.us is my website. It's professionally done. All my segments as a CBS analyst down here in Florida are on there. Some of my writings, publications, the book I wrote about 9/11 is in there. So everything I do is at brossi.us. And give me a few comments.
Okay. And then in terms of predictions, give us one bold prediction about the Trump presidency that we can lockbox in this segment and have it forever. And we'll see if it comes true or not.
Something very significant will develop with the Russian probe. I believe that there is money from Russia to Donald Trump and Donald Trump enterprises. It may be through the Deutsche Bank, it may be through a Saudi bank, but this investigation is going to link Donald Trump and his team, his members of that team, to Russia financially, and that will be the downfall of his presidency. And if anybody ever gets their hands on his tax returns, that's going to be a real problem.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement. Dr. Bart Rossi, clinical and political psychologist here for New Theory. As always, Dr. Rossi, it's a pleasure to have you on, and I want to thank you very much for your time.
Nice being with you, Tom.